Right, must be the AI people coming to get me because when I did the first recording of this, the whole video started jerking around. So I thought I better do this again. But basically, what was interesting that I found in the past couple of years is that the whole AI industry is being kept up by about one company, and that company is called OpenAI. Now, what I found interesting through sources like Ed Zitron and the Tech Report and Dr. J Simmons, I believe his name is, on YouTube, is that I don't quite understand the route not only to profitability but AGI, like that whole farce that was being touted. Now, as an engineer in the field, right, or an ex-engineer in the field, this is all quite hilarious to me. Why? Because a lot of engineers that I know don't really understand economics. I'm just going to be straight up and honest. A lot of them kind of focus a lot on the task and get on with it. I unfortunately don't fit in that category. I look at the economics as well. And what I found to be quite hilarious is that the market is saying, well, AI is the next big thing. But the actual economics of delivering the next big thing is pretty much not the next big thing, which is that, we had a consortium not too long ago in the UK where Jensen Huang and even Donald Trump came in to sign a contract on BBC, right? You can see it on the BBC, and basically saying, we're going to deliver AI, right? Data centers, new opportunities, all that kind of stuff. Now, as a British citizen, somebody who was working in software, I found it all quite hilarious. Why? Because there's no power, there's no infrastructure. We can't even, in the UK, we generally import more power than we create. And not only, when I was born, we were about the 5th exporter of oil in the UK, believe it or not. We were a net exporter of oil. We were the 5th biggest in the world. I find that quite hilarious because we don't have any oil, being produced at the moment. We do have oil in Scotland, around about that area. I forget exactly where, but there's oil up in that area, right nearby Scotland, just off the coast, in the sea, that can be drilled and can be used for energy. The problem becomes the politics in the middle. We have a government at the moment which I am very, well, as a young person, I'm very annoyed with it. I think a lot of young people are. A lot of people who are older than me have said the same thing. And it mainly boils down to things like taxes. It comes down to things like income potential, opportunity potential in the UK. That a lot of, the UK now has become pretty much a welfare state, which is embarrassing. It's embarrassing. Stagnation across the entire board, all that kind of stuff. So, where does this leave us with AI? Well, I don't think the UK has the money, nor the infrastructure, nor the manpower to even allow AI into the country. In fact, it was overturned from AI data center spending into defense spending not too long ago. This gets really, really infuriating because I don't think people don't want to work, believe it or not. I do not believe that there are people that don't want to work. I think people want to work. The problem is people don't have the motif to work because of red tape, legislation, political power and game, which is coming into the country. Like, I think it's got to the point now where a bin could literally be our prime minister. I can see it. I think there's so much mistrust in the political system. A bin, a literal bin, his name is Count Binface, would literally become the prime minister tomorrow if he ran. I mean, make it make sense, right? And all these politicians, they turn around and they say the same sort of thing. We're going to reform the UK. We need to ensure that our politics is, number one and all this sort of stuff. The problem with this is that in the UK, at least, nobody trusts them because they make false promises. And I think that is because we struggle in the UK with execution of different projects. So, for example, nuclear would enormously benefit the UK. Clean, efficient energy for things like data centers, for things like homes, efficient, clean, powerful. Lots of megawatts being produced. You know, to help with this particular economy and becoming an exporter of electricity, which would genuinely help along the way. And then that being incorporated into the energy network means that the UK could get paid tomorrow. We do have some nuclear projects which are in the pipeline, as far as I know, in the UK, but they will take time to produce, and that's the biggest problem right now. I think is the time to produce the energy doesn't necessarily favour UK economics. Now, what's interesting is that in the time that that's all happening, we had a bit of a committee with Jensen Huang and Donald Trump around AI data center technology being used and being put to use in the UK. Now, on that same day, I turned around and I said, we do not have the energy nor the infrastructure to support such a project in the UK. Where is this all going to come from? Turns out I was right, because just a few months later, the whole contract was cancelled. And I'm not sure if that was on the back of the scandal with the BBC and Donald Trump or not. I have no idea. I don't know. Now, remarkably, during that time, Keir Starmer was our Prime Minister. Now we have Andy Burnham, which is a new Prime Minister. I'm not sure what exactly he does or why we should care. But at the same time, it's become quite interesting politically to see what the next moves are. Especially with the whole rampant, number 10 of the North type project, which nobody really cares about because there are bigger problems to worry about. Make it make sense. But on the back of that, one thing that I found quite interesting is that Microsoft now has a 1 gigawatt data center. And apparently that was on June 29th. A 1 gigawatt data center. And apparently, so I'm struggling here because Microsoft has a 1 gigawatt data center. I'm wondering what they're powering it with, because that has got to be gas turbines at this point. It's got to be about 10 to 100 gas turbines, because there's nothing that makes that much power just yet. So apparently, as of June 26th, that's what happened, and they kind of made it all down. But it doesn't state, in the report. Can I get my display on here? Is there a way I can do this? Hang on one sec. There we go. It doesn't state in the report, how this is happening. This is the one that I'm looking at. It's a 2 gigawatt data center, right? As of 2025. So apparently they've brung them all up. I think this is a lie. I don't think we actually have a 1 gigawatt data center. Like, do they actually have one? I don't think so. I don't think so. How are we getting a 1 gigawatt data center up so quickly? The largest data center and data centers in the world with over 1 gigawatt capacity. Is it still under construction? It's got to be. Under construction as of November 2025. And you're telling me within 2 months they'll actually get 1 gigawatt? There's no way. 5.2 gigawatt solar PV generation. Really? Solar? So these are all the ones which, okay, so these aren't even. Oh, hello. IBM CEO says that there's no way for gigawatt data centers to turn a profit. So even if they did create one, they can't turn a profit on it. That's hilarious. That's hilarious. So this is what I was talking about. Like, there's no, like, we're talking about, 10 gigawatts, 100 gigawatts now, 8 trillion, costing 8 trillion for 100 gigawatts, IBM CEO. So if we don't have the data centers, right, because we don't have the power, how are we supposed to have AGI? Like, it doesn't really make much sense, does it? Like, forgive me for being, bearish on AI, but I think Michael Burry has a point. I really do. I do think he's a little bit early, and which is why his call and put options are a little bit down right now. But I do think he's on the money. I do think so. I think, I looked at some of these AI things. You got Claude, you got, Fable 5, which was a complete, utter crapshoot, let's just be honest, right? The whole it's too good to release type stuff and all that sort of stuff. So that was really, I don't know what was going on around there, right? That it had to be paused, and now it's part of the whole, you need to use APIs to consume it, and now it's just all a bit of a mess, from Mythos. Bit of a bad release. I used the model. I thought it was pretty good, to be honest. I thought it was, pretty well done. But what I find hilarious, despite all of that, is that China, right, is using $12 billion worth of investment in AI and running just slightly, just very, 2 to 3 months behind modern AI models. And the other thing that I think is threatening AGI and the profitability of AI is that they're doing it for free, right? You can get a DeepSeek model with the weights for gratis and run them on a DGX1, right? A DGX system. You could run them on AMD's DGX equivalent, right? Like, is there even a point of having a subscription anymore? Because if we're all going towards open source models, right, which everybody can see, how does this make sense for profitability? It's destroying the moat of AI. The whole thing of AI to become profitable is being destroyed in real time. So despite all the hype of it going into, new highs in the stock market, all of this kind of stuff, there's no way for it to really come into fruition, right? The real economics don't work, even if it's being manipulated. So we all know it's being manipulated, right? The stocks are all being manipulated, right? Because you've got the hedge funds, you've got the private equity, all that kind of stuff going into play. But at the same time, right, make it make sense that it's even going to work in the first place. Because right now, I don't think anybody's created anything significant with AI, right? I remember going into one of these organizations and asking, right, a big player in the DevOps industry. I turned around and said, "What's your plans with AI? Where are we going with AI?" And I couldn't get a straight answer. As an engineer, I couldn't get a straight answer. They were just like, "Oh yeah, we don't know." Basically was their answer. Now, considering that this company has a quantum computer literally sitting outside, right, of the office, it's a bit scary when they turn around and say, "We don't have a plan for AI besides open weight models, and using our own models and making them all secure because we can define where all the weights came from." I don't think anybody cares. They just care about, what exactly can it do. And right now, AI can't really do very much. I'm sorry to say that, but it can't. Like, a bit of coding here and there, no, not even that. You have to know your stuff to code it, right? I was building one out the other day, enterprise level software, and I had to prod it and push it and tell it, "No, this is not how you do things. You need to look at this. You need to look at that." "Oh, sorry, yeah, you're right. Like, this is what I was meant to be doing," right? Right? That sort of stuff. So it really got me thinking, the whole AI business, being left behind, all of this stuff, layoffs, overinvestment. How is this going to become profitable? I have no idea. I think by 2027, 2028, by 2030, we will see a crash. We will have to see a crash. There is no other way for the S&P to survive. It is not possible. There is no path to profitability, and we are going to end up with RAM being £10. I'm sorry, there's just no way, right? Investors need their money back as well. And if there's no growth within AI, it's not possible. I agree with Ed Zerton. I agree with Michael Burry on this, that I don't see a way out for this. It's just this whole, Dwalkesh and Jensen Huang says it perfectly. Not my words, Jensen Huang's word. America needs to win, basically. This is what this is. Does America really have a plan? Probably not. I understand the entire need to win. I get it. But I think this is just a poor way of executing. It's not delivering the value that he had promised or delivered. And a lot of people, I think, are getting sucked in without understanding the mechanics of what this AI technology actually is, which is a glorified search engine. Prove me wrong. Prove me wrong. Put it in the comments. Tell me what your thoughts are about that comment. AI is a glorified search engine, which it is. It's a glorified search engine with a predictability pattern. That's all it is. It just creates predictability in a pattern that it thinks that it sees based upon your input. And that's why I'm saying to a lot of engineers now, they came around and said, oh, AI is going to be taking our job and all this kind of stuff. I said, no. How is it going to take your job? It may make it more efficient, but it can't do what you can do. I can tell you that. I can tell you that. Because it can only do monotonous jobs. As soon as you try and introduce any sort of logic or anything that requires interconnectedness, it has no idea what to do. Because it's only trained on one specific area or subject at a time. So, where do I think it's going from there? Well, I think AI models are going to become a little bit more efficient in terms of the programming. I mean, look at it this way. If China can get away, right, the big bad boogeyman or whatever they call it nowadays, I don't know, but I think China's an amazing feat of engineering, considering that they've only had a $12 billion budget, right? I think they've done some amazing things, honestly, honest to God, right? They've done some absolutely incredible stuff, like, with DeepSeek, for example, Kimi K3 as another model, and they're able to be on par and sometimes better than the American models like Claude 5, Sonnet, right? Opus, for example, and even Mythos, right? Or Fable, if you like. And they're competing on that level. Says a lot about that industry. A lot. Now, there is speculation to say, we spent, $258 billion or whatever it was on training, on innovation, which is what the Americans have done. But at the same time, I'm thinking, well, China did it for like less than a tenth of that cost, and they've got better results on technology, which is supposed to be, insufficient, which says a lot about the way that we're optimizing the models. It says a lot about what we're training the models on, and even, how we're dealing with the efficiency. Because if they're able to run competitively on all the hardware, right, it leads me to believe that there's sub-optimizations inside of the ways that the LLM models are fundamentally being produced in terms of the architecture. Now, an interesting case in point would be AMD's Talus, right? Now, why did I say AMD's Talus? Because Talus was a company that is allowing for the AI model itself to be embedded in the chip. Now, that particular Talus model, right, which was the prototype, created 14,000 tokens a second. An embedded model in silicon, 14,000 tokens a second, compared to what? 100, 200, maybe 300 tokens a second using an NVIDIA system. That's where it gets interesting, right? Because rapid prototyping is now going to become a thing with AMD, whereby they're going to be able to say, right, okay, you could run a 3 trillion, 4 trillion parameter model inside of silicon, right, and get 15,000 tokens a second, from the custom architecture. Now combine that with AMD's offering. I mean, chiplet-based design, multiple of these. I mean, that could be, a recipe for some serious, some serious AI, not even inference, but serious, AI topology, right? Which, when I think about it, could even enhance the mixture of experts field if they could get the chiplet-based design talking to all these different ones in production, bringing down the cost significantly, as it's a particular type of ASIC. So I think that's going to be interesting to see, a mixture of experts model, right, which is going to be like, you have music in one department, one chip, AI in another, programming in another, that sort of stuff, as opposed to having, this multi-layered construct going through the infinity fabric, right, of AMD on silicon in the die, and then saying, right, okay, you get 14,000 to 15,000 tokens a second, and then have HBM memory on top. So you have that entire package. I think that's going to be interesting, And we're talking about a millisecond of latency between it, depending on what the HBM buffer can hold. I think that's where we're going with AI. And then I think after that, maybe quantum computing might become a big one. But I think AMD's got something really interesting there in comparison to NVIDIA with the Grok acquisition, which was just inference, right? Focusing on inference as far as I understand, but looking at it in a different angle because NVIDIA was really nervous about the ASICs being created by Facebook, Google, all this kind of thing. So where does that leave the individual, who is really concerned about AI? I think AI innovation is still going to be quite interesting. It's still going to be, more or less at the frontier, but the path to profitability is looking more and more dire. Anyway, one sec. Okay, I forgot what I was talking about, so I'm pretty sure I was done with my point, so I'm going to end the video here. All right, if you want to see more of this, subscribe to the channel, and yeah, let me know your thoughts about AI, and where do you think this is all going? I think that was my point. So yeah, let me know in the comments, and let's have a discussion. All right, I'll see you in the next one.